Even after our breakup, Shiya refused to let go. Every evening, she would wait downstairs at my apartment building, trying to find an excuse to see me again. One night, I finally reached my limit and sent her a message, "Bring some walnuts upstairs." A few minutes passed, and there was no reply. My patience ran out completely, and I sent another message, "Shiya, please have some self-respect. We've already broken up." Not long after, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and a cold breeze swept in. Standing there was the tall beauty herself, Shiya, all 1.7 meters of her. She stared at me coldly, as if ready to demand answers. But I, slightly drunk, leaned lazily against the doorframe and smirked. "You got here fast. How did you know I was downstairs?" she asked, her eyes sharp and probing. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled her into the apartment and closed the door behind her. Then, without hesitation, I reached to take off her coat. "Wait a second." Shiya grabbed my wrist, a hint of hesitation flickering in her eyes. Her coat slid to the floor, pooling at my feet. I tugged my wrist a couple of times but couldn't free it. Looking down at her, I teased, "What's the matter, didn't you buy it?" She stared at me for a moment before finally speaking, "I did." Taking the opportunity, I broke free from her grip, draped an arm over her shoulders, and leaned closer. She closed her eyes as if resigning herself, and we kissed. This time, she didn't hold back. Instead, she took the lead, wrapping her arms around my neck and controlling the rhythm. Out of breath, I leaned weakly against her, teasing, "Practiced your kissing skills after the breakup, huh?" Shiya used to be so strict, always setting rules against drinking, staying out late, and insisting on having her phone on 24/7. This bold behavior was completely out of character for her. Ignoring my teasing, she softly asked, "Do you want to get back together?" I froze, staring at her wide-eyed, unable to respond. Seeing my silence, her expression darkened, and her tone grew colder. "You don't want to reconcile?" I chuckled lightly, replying with a devil-may-care attitude, "Why not?" Hearing my answer, she bitterly rubbed her temples, sighed, picked up her coat from the floor, and turned to leave. "Shiya, don't come back again," I said, my tone sharp, likely fueled by the alcohol. She paused, her shoulders trembling slightly. "Why are you crying?" I asked, a hint of impatience in my voice. She looked up, her eyes reddened and glistening with tears, her face streaked with sorrow. She looked so pitiful yet so captivating. "Go, do you think I'm pretending?" she choked out, her voice heavy with grievance. "Do you hate me that much? Then why would you send that kind of message?" Her tear-streaked face and vulnerable demeanor left me momentarily stunned. I leaned in and kissed her softly. 10 minutes later, she pushed me away, her voice trembling. "Go, if you don't want to get back together, why do you keep tormenting me like this?" I licked my lips and grinned. "What's wrong, Miss Lee?" She averted her gaze, her tone tinged with restrained anger. "Go, you're really going too far." Tears hung from the corners of Shiya's eyes, her lips still glistening, making her look incredibly enticing. I didn't catch what she was saying and leaned in closer to ask, "Can I kiss you again?" "No." She rejected me decisively. "We've already broken up. So what breaking up means we can't kiss anymore?" I shrugged indifferently. Her eyes reddened further in frustration at my nonsensical logic. Shaking her head, she stood firm, a look of defiance on her face. I glanced at her lips, and she noticed, her face turning redder as she stepped back cautiously like she was guarding against a thief. We stood in a tense silence for a moment. My foggy head gradually cleared, and I let out a cold snort. "Fine, no kissing. Leave." I pushed her toward the doorway. "Win, don't be like this. Can we talk?" "I don't want to talk." I pursed my lips, snapping, "Shiya, just leave now and don't come back." After a pause, I added, "Oh, and leave the condoms behind." Her brows furrowed, and her gaze grew complicated. My irritation only flared up further. I chuckled coldly and sneered, "I'll use them with someone else." The moment I finished speaking, I felt the air grow significantly heavier. Shiya's eyes filled with anger as she stared at me. Before I could say anything else, she grabbed my neck and kissed me fiercely. As our lips clashed, she muttered darkly, "Go, you'll never learn how to speak properly, will you? From now on, no matter what you say, I want to listen." She pushed me step by step into the bedroom, forcing me onto the bed. Standing over me, her entire demeanor exuded a chilling dominance. "Shiya, can you be a little gentler?" I finally regretted provoking her. "Scared now?" She chuckled softly, her fingers lightly toying with the buttons of her shirt, her smile warm enough to send chills down my spine. What task? I instinctively leaned back. Kneeling on one knee at the edge of the bed, her slender fingers gripped my chin. Her voice was slow and intimate, like a lover's whisper, "The task of using up those condoms, of course." I didn't know when I fell asleep, but the sound of rain pattering against the window filled my dreams. When I woke up, she was gone. On the table, there was a note and a bank card. "There's breakfast on the table that you like. I'm off to work. There's some spending money on the card, baby. See you tonight." I stared at the word "see you tonight," feeling my heart tremble slightly. Last night, she had pressed me endlessly to reconcile. In my dazed state, I had given in, and now I seemed to be her boyfriend again. Opening my phone, I noticed a message in the high school alumni group, "Yan is coming back to China." I froze at the sight of her name. By Yanyan, my first love. The day we broke up, it was raining too. She had stood in front of me, her eyes red, her voice choked. Gu Win, you're truly heartless. I set my phone down and looked out the window. Rain trickled down the glass, tracing paths like an enormous net, binding everyone within it. Today, Shiya would return. She'd been on a business trip for the past few days, giving me some peace. But I had to think seriously about how to bring up breaking up again. After all, dating the niece of my first love seemed utterly absurd. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Shiya with the address of a restaurant, along with a gym photo. In the picture, her fingers gripped tightly, her shirt pulled up just slightly to reveal a faint hint of ABS, tantalizingly seductive. I suspected she had learned how to tempt me because she always managed to make my heart itch. At the restaurant, a server led me to a private room. When the door opened, it was empty. She had mentioned she'd be late, but I was still annoyed. 10 minutes later, the door finally opened. A tall woman stepped in, and I immediately moved toward her. She stopped me with a hand to my mouth and gave me a light peck. Gu Win, do you only like my body? Of course not, I said, pulling her into my arms and inhaling the familiar rose scent on her. My hand drifted to her waistline as I casually lied, this just proves I like you physically. Doesn't that count as precious? She paused for a moment before leaning in to kiss me again. Your place tonight or a hotel? Shiya didn't answer. Instead, she held my shoulders and gently pulled back, studying my face intently. Feeling a rare twinge of awkwardness, I asked, what, is there something on my face? No, Win. Her voice was soft, her gaze tender but carrying a trace of hidden obsession. I just thought, you're very handsome. She pulled my hand away and leaned in closer again. Shiya took out a handkerchief from her pocket and carefully wiped the saliva from the corner of my mouth. I half closed my eyes, cooperating with her movements. The glass in the private room reflected our silhouettes, neither of us speaking, the atmosphere serene and beautiful. After a moment, Shiya stood up and suddenly spoke, my family wants to meet you. I opened my eyes, blinking mechanically, a sense of unease rising within me. Which family member? Before she could answer, I heard the door open behind me. Shiya's gaze shifted past me and focused on the doorway. Auntie, you're here. Seeing Bai Yanyan again at that moment, my first thought was, how did she become even more beautiful at 30? Bai Yanyan had completely shed her youthful innocence. Her features were sharper and more defined, and every gesture exuded elegance and confidence. Meanwhile, I was frozen in place, my mind completely blank. Hello, I'm Shiya's aunt. My name is Bai Yanyan, she said with a polite smile, her voice calm and courteous. I forced a stiff smile, stammering awkwardly, hello. You can call me little uncle. Bai Yanyan's smile softened further, while I felt utterly humiliated. Never had I imagined that one day I'd be sitting at the same table with both my first love and current girlfriend. The scene felt like an excruciating ethical dilemma come to life. They chatted away while I kept my head down the entire time. Win, are you feeling unwell? Shiya leaned closer, her concern evident. My chest tightened, and I nearly dropped my chopsticks. No, I'm fine. You two keep talking. She raised her hand, seemingly wanting to touch my face. I instinctively leaned away, and her hand hovered in midair before she slowly withdrew it. Win, don't you love studying plants? My aunt is a botanist. Shiya tried to ease the tension. Bai Yanyan chuckled softly, her tone tinged with mockery. So little uncle is a plant enthusiast? I wouldn't have guessed. I finally lifted my head, sneaking a glare at her while forcing a fake smile. Just dabble in it. Under the table, her foot had accidentally kicked my leg 3 times. When she did it again, I silently cursed, damn passive-aggressive woman, still holding a grudge. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly awkward. Bai Yanyan's tone carried a hint of sarcasm, while Shiya seemed visibly annoyed. Win, doesn't he like fish? Shiya interjected to decline a dish, her tone oddly cold. Bai Yanyan chuckled lightly. You seem to know her well. Of course, auntie. She's my boyfriend, Shiya replied evenly, but her fingers tightened around the wine glass. I felt suffocated and quickly made an excuse to escape to the bathroom. When I stepped out, a slender figure stood in the hallway. Bai Yanyan leaned against the wall, a cigarette between her fingers, unlit, idly twirling it. She glanced at me, her eyes unreadable. Gu Win, how's the game of pretending not to know your ex going? I sneered, firing back, pretty fun, auntie. I deliberately stretched the word, teasing her. Sure enough, a crack appeared in her composed smile. Gu Win, you even have the nerve to call me that. She scoffed, her tone dripping with derision. With me here, do you think you can actually marry Shiya? Her disapproving look irritated me further, and I shot back provocatively, what if I insist on marrying her? She didn't respond immediately, holding my gaze for a moment before suddenly letting out a soft laugh. She took a step closer and, before I could react, grabbed my wrist and shoved me against the wall. Her hand gripped my waist, and our bodies pressed tightly together. I could feel the rhythm of her breathing. Bai Yanyan, let go. I gritted my teeth, glaring at her as I lowered my voice. Are you crazy? Shiya is still inside. She smirked, blinking innocently. Her voice was maddeningly playful. Don't you think that makes it even more exciting? I froze, staring at her in disbelief. What on earth did he learn during these years abroad? Bai Yanyan's smile deepened. She raised her head and leaned close to my earlobe. Her voice was slow. It was like bewitching. What would happen if Li Shiya saw us like this? I swallowed hard. I felt my ears were burning. She really wanted to humiliate me. You were beaten by her. I broke up with her. She raised her eyebrows like this. It was still straight. I closed my eyes. You are really sick. Is it necessary to hate me to this extent? Bai Yanyan didn't answer me. And her fingers tapped my waist lightly. Wu Yan asked, are you happy to be in love with a woman 5 years younger than you? I pinched the soft flesh on her waist. Happy, young, and energetic. Happier than with you. She pulled her lips. Still smiling. Good. Very good. The next second. My chin was pinched hard. The woman's cold breath approached instantly. The phone rang suddenly. Li Shiya called. Bai Yanyan stopped moving. A malicious cold light flashed in her eyes. I almost dropped my phone when I picked it up. I was holding onto my momentum. Bai Yanyan, you're not going to stop, are you? After saying that, I quickly turned off my phone. Why am I afraid that she'll know? I took a few breaths. Then I looked up and stared at her intently. Bai Yanyan frowned. What are you looking at? I found something. She looked puzzled. She looked much cuter than before. I curled my eyes. The jade on my chest disappeared by half. Hooked his button with my fingertips and pulled it down. The woman lowered her head. Bai Yanyan, you seem to. My side slowly moved from her lips to her eyes. The voice was slow and dramatic. You still like me? Bai Yanyan was shocked. The lights in the corridor seemed to dim. After 2 seconds, he pushed me away and took a few steps back. As if he couldn't avoid it. Bai Yanyan tightened her fingers and mocked Gu Win. Don't be so confident in yourself. I'm not so low-key. What do you think of your niece's boyfriend? Besides, do you deserve it? His words are as bad as mine. I don't care. Then you should be more self-respecting. And, I walked past him. The reunion of old lovers after a long absence ended in a bad mood. I didn't reply. Private room. I called Li Shiya back. I made a random lie. Say I'm not feeling well. I want to go home. The woman's tone on the other end of the phone couldn't tell her emotions. I'll take you there, no need. I haven't finished my words. I was interrupted by the other end. Her voice was tense. Speechless. I'm your girlfriend. I frowned slightly. I felt like she had something else in her words. Finally I got into Li Shiya's car. I propped my head up to look at the pedestrians outside the car window. It seemed like the end of the evening self-study get out of class at school. Students were walking on the sidewalk arm in arm. Occasionally I saw 1 or 2 couples carrying school bags, holding hands shyly and sweetly. My thoughts were pulled far away. Bai Yanyan and I used to do the same. We wore blue and white school uniforms and walked side by side every night. In the silent night, our hands were hanging at our sides, swinging back and forth. Our fingers accidentally touched each other. Bai Yanyan carefully hooked my little finger, stumbling. Can we hold hands? I blushed and nodded. His face was also red. His fingers were inserted into my fingers little by little. It was a bit difficult to hold my fingers tightly. Do you think I am small? How is your aunt? The voice from the deep side pulled me back. I recovered. I glanced at Li Shiya's frowning face. Why did you suddenly say this? She stopped the car at the red light. The slender index finger tapped the steering wheel. Just asking casually. I remembered the bad look of the woman in the corridor just now. I don't like it very much. Your aunt? Li Shiya raised her eyebrows. Then nodded in agreement. She is old. She still hangs out in the research institute every day. She is indeed a bit rigid and difficult to get along with. If I remember correctly, Bai Yanyan seems to be the same age as me. I leaned my head against the car window. I felt drowsy. The reason why I broke up with Bai Yanyan was actually a common problem between couples, long-distance relationship. She went abroad as soon as she graduated from high school. We met about 3 or 4 times a month. When we didn't meet, we would video chat every day. But even so, there seemed to be irreconcilable and hidden contradictions between us. Many small problems that could not be solved in time due to distance will eventually explode one day. At that time, I had just entered college. I saw a broader sky. Ground. I felt the street view more intuitively. I initially realized the distance between me and Bai Yanyan. She has always been a favorite girl. Good at studying, good family background. Good looks. I was very different from now. I was in my early 20s, feeling inferior and twisted. I even forgot what happened that day. Maybe it was because I couldn't write the paper. Maybe it was because I ate something bad. My stomach hurt so much. I called Bai Yanyan in tears. The person who answered the phone was a boy, speaking French that I couldn't understand. I finally broke down. I cried loudly after hanging up the phone. The next day I broke up with Bai Yanyan. That night, under the sycamore tree behind the dormitory building, Hong Zwoyan, a girl who rushed back from the journey, hugging me in her arms. She tightened her arms around me inch by inch. Her voice trembled. Speechless. The boy I can explain to. Just one of my classmates. I left my phone at the institute that day. It was my negligence. You can hit me or scold me. Don't break up with me. Speechless. Just don't break up with me. He said later that his voice was already filled with tears. I looked at the few stars sparsely hugging in the night sky and whispered to Bai Yanyan, I just don't like you anymore. The girl's thin body froze. Her tears fell on my neck and burned my whole body. Bai Yanyan cried hard that day and kissed me while crying. My face was also wet. I forgot how that day ended. I only remember that Bayan bit my shoulder viciously in the end. She said, "Gu, I will never like you again." I was awakened by a sudden jolt. The car stopped. I opened my eyes in confusion. I met a pair of cold eyes. Shiya's face softened suddenly. Her voice was gentle as water when she looked at me. My brother had just had a dream. I was stunned and remembered some past events. "Why did you suddenly call me brother?" Shiya didn't answer my doubts. Instead, I asked if it was important. "What past events?" I was a little confused. Shiya suddenly leaned over and kissed my lips. My eyelashes trembled. I slowly closed my eyes. After kissing for several minutes, he let me go. "My head is dizzy. It's cold and I want to sleep. Alone." Shiya stared at me for a long time. Before she said, "I'll take you upstairs." Upstairs, I opened the door. The lights weren't on yet. Shiya pressed me down and tried to kiss me again. I quickly covered my face. Hurriedly, I said, "I'm really tired today." Shiya didn't move. In the dark, I could only hear the woman's trembling breathing. He took a deep breath, knowing to rest early, accompanied by the sound of the door closing. The surroundings returned to calm. I slowly put down my hand, silently looking at the empty darkness in front of me. Sure enough, I should break up early. Shiya and I are in an underground relationship. My request. This way, we can have less trouble when we break up. When I was in love with Shiya, I was 29 years old. When I was a student, I still had some vague class concepts. After entering society, day by day, it became clearer and clearer. Shiya is the heir of the Lee family. He can't marry a small person like me. As a small person, I don't want to marry into a wealthy family with jewels and gems. We have been, there will be no future. The next morning, I went to work at the company. I sat at my workstation and typed. I checked it one last time. After sending the resignation letter, I stretched my body. I opened my phone. My cousin from my hometown sent me a message. "Brother, uncle, and aunt said they will come to see you next week. It seems that they have called the police to find me again." I turned my chair. Those painful fragments came to my mind again. I have been a good boy since I was a child. I pretended to be good. Because I realized early on that only by pretending to be good can I avoid being beaten by my parents. After pretending for a long time, it seems that I really got into the role. The most rebellious time in adolescence was in high school. I secretly applied for a school far away from home. The day the admission letter arrived, my mother slapped me. Then locked me in the room for 2 weeks. The only one who accompanied me was a hamster. Later, the hamster was eaten by my sister's cat. I didn't say anything. I became a good boy again. Later, perhaps because the balloon was blown up for too long, it would burst one day. As soon as I graduated from college, my parents arranged a blind date for me. A man with a face full of flesh, greasy woman. The moment that woman stretched out her hand to me, I suddenly realized I seemed to have lived too hard these years. So I stopped pretending. I left with my suitcase in the middle of the night. I never went back. I looked up at the ceiling. My mother failed in business a few years ago. She owed a lot of money. So she came to me. I settled the accounts. I transferred the money they spent on me to them. Then I moved quickly. It seemed that they had spent all the money again. I wanted to laugh but pulled my lips. And I felt like crying. I opened my email. The latest email. It was my visa from the embassy. It was successfully processed. I put down my phone. This time I am going to the starting point. I will never come back. My last overtime. The sky was already dark when I got off work. Shiya sent me a message. "I am waiting for you at home." The picture is a spring photo. The location seems to be in the bathroom. Water drops hang on the woman's smooth spring light. The sexy mermaid line spreads all the way down. It makes people think a lot. I bite my lip. My forehead is throbbing. Shiya, do you have an account on a certain platform? On the surface, he is a well-dressed CEO. In the background, he is a flirtatious woman. Very exciting plot. I opened the door when I got home. The lights were on in the living room. I walked out of the entrance. Shiya, my words were stuck in my throat. I stared blankly at the scene in front of me. A scent of roses lingered at the tip of my nose. Shiya was lying on the sofa with her legs crossed. She was dressed neatly. She exuded an indescribable temperament. She rarely wore such sexy skirts. The waistline was slightly tightened. The hem of the white skirt was tucked into the waistband. You could vaguely see the muscle lines hidden under the clothes. Black skirt pants. There was a protruding shape on the side of the thigh. It was the skirt frame. She raised her head with her legs crossed. The eyelids and throat slid up and down. The warm yellow light shone on him. She was sad and beautiful. I must be red all over now. Swallowed with great difficulty. He heard the sound. He raised his eyes slightly. He narrowed his eyes at me sadly. Then he slowly retracted his gaze. Damn, it's really exciting. I quickly covered my nose. Then I stood there. After a long while, I moved forward. A hint of success flashed in the woman's eyes. I raised my palm and pressed her shoulders. Her hair fell down. Can you seduce me less? She chuckled. She lifted her eyelids lazily. Test my brother's willpower. I raised my eyebrows and the temperature around me was slowly rising. I brushed his lips with my fingertips. Then can you sit still? Shiya's eyes darkened. Okay. He closed his eyes sensibly. There is a knife above the word lust. I stared at him. After a while, I endured, and finally suppressed the heat with difficulty. I spoke slowly, Shiya, let's break up. The woman opened her eyes, and there was no anger as I imagined. She just stared at me quietly. The ambiguous atmosphere just now gradually cooled down. I don't want to talk about the reason anymore. I don't want to talk about it anymore. His eyes returned to their usual coldness. It's not for others. There is obviously something behind his words. I frowned and stood up to look down at him. You suspect I'm cheating? Shiya, I would do such a troublesome thing. I moved my fingers. Shamelessly laughed. If I fall in love with someone else, I will definitely inform you openly. Shiya cried again. He trembled and held my wrist. Eyes were red. Can we not break up? I have a headache. I really can't do anything to him when he cries. I can't pull my hand away. The voice became cold. But I don't like you anymore. Do we have to break up? Shiya's tears fell more and more. If we have to break up, he tightened his grip on me. He lowered his head and laughed at himself. It turns out that crying is useless this time. Wait for me to come back. At this time, Shiya had already pinched the back of my neck and kissed me. Tears fell between my lips and teeth. Bitter and salty. He held my hand tightly. The oxygen in my chest was rapidly consumed. Before suffocating, I bit the tip of the woman's tongue hard. The smell of blood was everywhere. He hissed in pain. I don't know where the strength came from. I pushed him away suddenly. I bent over and gasped. I called him a lunatic. His chest also rose and fell. There was a faint blood in the corner of his mouth. He casually brushed it with his fingers. I am a lunatic. His dark eyes stared at me. Syllable 1. I clenched my teeth as I spoke each word. Gu-Win, what are you, a liar? You said you would only love me in this life. I covered my chest and laughed while panting. Shiya, you are so childish. This life is so long. Someone will always be let down by me. What do you want me to say? Do you feel sorry for you meeting a scumbag? Shiya stood there, her face darkening. Before he went crazy again, I quickly stood up and staggered out the door. Fortunately, he didn't catch up. When I ran all the way downstairs, I turned around. Come over here, damn, how come I came out? That's my home. But I don't have the courage to go back. I found the nearest hotel and booked a room. Fortunately, there was one room left. But now I stood at the door of the room, holding the room card in my hand, looking at the woman in front of me with a frown. She claimed to live next door. She was so embarrassed, she quarreled with my niece. Ba Yanyan leaned against the wall and said with a smile. I met him quite often. I glared at him and said, your niece was bullied by me. As an elder, are you going to seek justice for him? He seemed to be in a good mood tonight. There was a smile on his lips. You were very angry. Who told you to fall in love with a woman 5 years younger than you? I rolled my eyes. He looked much more mature than you. He was angry. He was very disdainful of comparing a little brat with a mature woman. Oh my God, did he drink fake wine? Ba Yanyan, tell me the truth. You went abroad in the past few years. You actually went to be a little gangster. Why are you so unruly now? He raised his eyebrows slightly. I was a gangster for a while. I opened my mouth and wanted to speak. Suddenly, a muffled thunder sounded in my ears. Then, the sound of crackling rain followed. It formed a chaotic movement. It seemed that there was a lot of rain this year. I glanced at the woman next to me, and then looked away uncomfortably. Does your leg still hurt? Ba Yanyan straightened up, then turned sideways. Her right leg was blocked. It didn't hurt. Ba Yanyan's right calf was stung once in her second year of high school. I was serving dishes at a food stall after evening self-study. When I got off work, I was entangled by a few little girls. Just when I was hesitating whether to smash the bottle on their heads, Ba Yanyan rushed out from nowhere. She punched the little girl with the dagger in the face. The sudden change made me stand there in a daze. I stared blankly. The younger classmate who I didn't know well. At this moment, he was wrestling with those people with a stingy face. His leg was broken at that time. In order to protect me, another thunder sounded. The atmosphere became a little subtle. Ba Yanyan didn't seem to want to continue this topic. The doctor said disdainfully. Your hairstyle is so ugly. Your hairstyle is ugly. Is that so? He lifted his hair. I do have the idea of changing my hairstyle recently. I swiped my card to open the door. You'd better save it. After washing up and lying on the bed. Open the phone. 10 minutes ago. Ba Yanyan posted a circle of friends about the summer of 18 years old. The picture was our class's high school graduation photo. I suddenly remembered the high school reunion some time ago. Everyone seemed to be different from the time in high school. In the photo, Ba Yanyan and I stood together. My arm was close to the immature boy. The girl had a smile on her face. It was frozen on the blurred photo paper in a place where the camera can't capture. We held hands secretly. My fingertips moved slightly. I gave him a thumbs up. I didn't expect Ba Yanyan would suddenly start to reminisce about the past. The next day at noon, I went to the restaurant on the second floor of the hotel to eat. I had no appetite, So I bit a piece of dry bread in my mouth. Then I opened my phone and continued to argue with the study abroad agency. Someone approached the fish tank. I raised my eyes and met a pair of narrow eyes. Bai Yanyan brought a cup of coffee. Sat down opposite me. I ignored her. Bowed my head and continued to send messages. We sat quietly facing each other. Strangely, the years were quiet. I don't know how long it took. The woman suddenly spoke. Is Shiya good to you? I didn't even raise my head. Pretty good, right? She crossed her long legs and leaned back. But she didn't seem to know that you don't like fish just because you don't like to spit out fish bones. I paused. Recalling the conversation at the dinner table that night. I didn't tell her. She seemed very curious. Why didn't you say it? You're too lazy, right? Bai Yanyan took a sip of coffee. It seems that you don't care much about my niece. I raised my head impatiently. Then he smiled with his lips curled. The black coffee liquid swayed gently in the cup. This made it very difficult for me as an aunt. He looked behind me. You said it, right? My neck stiffened. I realized it later. I turned my head when I realized what was going on. Sure enough, Shiya was standing not far away. She clenched her fists. Strength surged in her eyes. She stared at the two of us. She was tense all over. Her voice was very hoarse. Gu Wen came over. I didn't move on purpose. It was purely because my legs were numb. Wen was really rude. Bai Yanyan turned her watch slowly. You don't even say hello when you see me. Shiya didn't say anything. Her face was cold. She seemed to be on the verge of a rage. The woman sitting opposite me was still drinking coffee elegantly. In the tense atmosphere, Shiya laughed in defeat. The tip of her tongue touched the bottom plug. I'm so sorry, Aunt. I'm young and impatient. I didn't notice you were here too. She apologized, but her attitude was even more arrogant than before. But I have never seen someone as nostalgic as my aunt. It has been many years since we broke up, but she is still talking about her ex-boyfriend. Grandpa, it seems that you still don't know that you have returned to China. The three words ex-boyfriend exploded in my mind. I looked at Shiya in disbelief. I was completely stunned. How did you know? I thought they had some entanglement with wealthy families. I was just watching the show. I didn't expect it to be a dramatic emotional dispute. It was about me. And why did they both seem to know it? Bai Yanyan was lying in a mean way. You are threatening me. How dare you, and I am just asking you. Don't embarrass me, a junior. Until I was dragged away by Shiya, I was still dizzy. Mei Lijing looked back. Bai Yanyan sat there motionless. Shiya pulled me forward all the way. Opened a door and went in. Shiya hadn't finished her words yet. I was thrown hard on the sofa. I stood up. What are you crazy about? I am crazy, brother. It is obviously you who did something wrong. Shiya took off her coat. What did I do wrong? Brother doesn't know what he did wrong. I frowned and thought of the conversation between him and Bai Yanyan. Struggled to stand up. Feeling headache. Bai Yanyan and I just met by chance. Do my eyes look like Bai Yanyan's? I don't understand why he suddenly said this. What, his eyes are full of gloom? You said my eyes are the most beautiful before. The cold voice made me sweat. What on earth is he imagining? I swallowed my saliva. Really calmed myself down. Don't talk nonsense. Bai Yanyan and I were many years ago. Really? Shiya obviously didn't listen to me. Then why did you put the 100 love letters he wrote to you on the bedside table? You went through my things. So what? He sneered and pinched my face. Bai Yanyan, do you love me? Does he have my sense of service? His eyes were red. He continued to unbutton his skirt, exposing his delicate collarbone. I felt that he was not in a good state. Quickly comforted him. Shiya, calm down. Tears hung from the corners of his eyes. Why can't you like me more? He approached me. While crying, he tore off my coat. Shiya snapped. I slapped her. Her head tilted to one side. Her eyelashes drooped. The surroundings fell silent. Only the sound of breathing remained. My hands were shaking slightly. After a long time, I gathered my coat. My heart gradually became colder. Finally, I looked at the woman in front of me coldly and said sarcastically. Shiya, I said that Zhuang Qingshen was not suitable for you. You don't want to break up with me. Then what do you want to do? Marry me in the future? He didn't say anything. Looked at me steadily. The smile on my lips became colder. I thought you were sober. Shiya, you can accept me. Your parents can also accept you. Are you with me? I was aggressive. Fingertips pinched into my palm. The news of your marriage with the young master of the Xiao family appeared in the entertainment headlines every day. You think I am blind? Can't see what my identity will be in the future? You are the shameful canary. Speaking of this, the blood on Shia's face finally faded completely. It was as if she had finally come back to her soul. No, no. She was pale. She held my hand in panic. He was just hyping it up. I won't marry anyone else. It's my fault. He lowered his head in annoyance. The corners of his eyes were red. It's all my fault. I thought you didn't care about this before. I pulled my hand out coldly to interrupt him. I don't care about Shia. But I don't have the idea of being a son-in-law of a wealthy family. Don't embarrass me. After saying that, I turned and walked out the door. I didn't look back. Shia stood there. Slowly attacked her body. It seemed that all the hostility in her body was drained away in an instant. In the next few days, Shiya didn't appear in front of me. An unknown number sent me a text message. Wu Yan, wait for me. I will definitely take care of everything. My ticket is for next week's night. I was typing on the keyboard to make a plan. Just halfway through, a call came in. Bai Yanyan's call. I picked up the phone and didn't say anything. Bai Yanyan gu Wu Yan. After a while, a woman's hoarse and ambiguous voice came from the other end. I feel so bad. Can you pick me up? You've been drinking. I listened to the noisy music on the phone. My brows were furrowed. I pressed my temples in the bar. Bai Yanyan, you're not a child anymore. The other side was silent for a long time before speaking. It's okay if you don't come. I don't think so. I actually hate you if you come. He hung up the phone. Before hanging up, I heard someone chatting him up. Are you drinking here alone, beautiful woman? Do you want to go somewhere else? And if I heard it right, it seems to be a boy. I took a deep breath. My heart ached. Bai Yanyan, this idiot. Give me the address. Just about to curse. The message alert sounded. Bai Yanyan's location met the bar. He was considerate. I drove all the way there. Just as I got off the car and was about to walk into the door with flashing lights, someone grabbed my wrist. Bai Yanyan had indeed drunk a lot of wine. The surrounding neon lights were light at this moment, shooting on his facial features, blurring the cold edges, looking a little fragile. I looked at him silently. He also looked at me. His eyes were misty, but he still spoke coldly. Pretentious. Why are you here? Didn't you ask me to come? He said, oh, and lowered his head like a child who had done something wrong. I took him in the car. But half an hour later, I looked at the drowsy woman sitting in the passenger seat. I regretted picking him up very much. This man was drunk and couldn't tell me where he lived. Took him to the room he wanted to book in the hotel. We were at the door. He still hummed, she whined, and refused to get out of the car. Wait until he sobers up. I must make him compensate me for my mental damages. I had no choice but to take her home. Open the door. The drunk woman followed me into exchange blood. She raised her head and didn't move. Stared at a pair of black slippers on the ground. They were Shiya's. I thought she had mysophobia. Opened the shoe cabinet and took her a new pair. Then ignored her. Took her pajamas and went into the bathroom to take a shower. After taking a shower, she hummed a song while drying her hair. While humming, I heard a knock at the door. I turned off the hair dryer. The man knocked on the door again. I opened the bathroom door. Bai Yanyan. Bai Yanyan squatted at the door, as if she had been waiting for me. He hugged his knees with his arms. He lowered his head. The tip of his ear was red. The woman's suppressed sobs came into my ears. My heart trembled. Why did she cry? He buried his head even lower. I squatted. Go to him. Raise your hand and touch his forehead. No fever. Just when I was about to withdraw my hand with a puzzled look, the woman suddenly grabbed my wrist, slowly raised her head. I was about to stand still, dazzled by the amazing beauty in front of me. Bai Yanyan cried and her face turned red. Her cold face was covered with crisscrossing tear marks. Her eyes were even redder than usual. Her eyes were filled with crystal tears. In the blink of an eye, she swayed and fell. He slowly put his face against my palm. Rubbed it gently like a little animal. I really hate you. My ears were burning. I rubbed his hair uncontrollably. The tone was unconsciously relaxed. Do you hate me again? He didn't say anything. Sobbed and came over to hug me. I lost my balance. We both fell to the ground. I was a little glad that a thick carpet was laid here. Bai Yanyan buried his head in my shoulder. Her arms tightened inch by inch. The hot tears all fell into my neck. I thinking of the day we broke up. Bai Yanyan also cried so sadly. My eyes suddenly felt sore. I patted his back. What are you crying for? He whimpered and cried for a while. Then he choked and complained. It's all your fault. Blame me. Blame me. His sobs became louder. He cried very sadly. Woo, I don't want to be a mistress. I don't want to compete with my niece for her boyfriend. Woo, my half-dried hair was scattered on the carpet. I looked at the ceiling absent-mindedly. It took a long time before I spoke tenderly. Why do you still like me? Bai Yanyan's ears were left with only the sad sobbing of a woman. After a while, she took a breath and spoke to me intermittently. I just still like you. I am cheap. I am sick. What can you do to me? Her tone was as arrogant as a child. I laughed. And you were quite righteous. The warm yellow light was faint on us. I touched his hair and asked softly, how have you been doing abroad these years? It seems that we finally have the opportunity to drink alcohol. Alcohol. How is it? My wallet is always stolen. The sound of smoking came down. He seemed to be sober. He realized what he was doing. His tone became awkward. My pen was stolen last month. The one you saved up for 2 months of pocket money. I hid it very casually. I was not sad at all when it was lost. I moved my fingers. Bai Yanyan was wrong. He rubbed my neck aggrievedly. In fact, I was very sad. I cried secretly for a long time. I sighed. Why did you become so tearful? Then kiss me. I will stop crying. I was speechless. This person, Bai Yanyan. Do you have any fetish? He was silent. As if thinking seriously. Does it count if I like to bite you? I called him a pervert. He cried hungry. Bad man, he wiped his tears randomly. Raised his head and we looked at each other quietly. 2 seconds later, he kissed my lips. The next morning, I woke up from the bed with soreness all over my body. Already beside me no one is there. I get out of bed and walk out of the bedroom. I pass by the trash can and see an extra pair of slippers inside. There is a sound coming from the toilet. I walk over, the petite woman in casual clothes stands in front of the sink with her back to me. She is fiddling with something. I bend my fingers and knock on the door. He hears the sound and turns around. Baby, you are awake. I just went out to buy breakfast. I bought the bread you like. I didn't say anything. My eyes fell on what he was holding. A broken toothbrush. It was also what Shiya didn't have time to take away. I snorted and laughed. It was really a big boost. Bayanyan didn't care. She threw the toothbrush into the trash can next to her. My hand slipped. Shiya is on a business trip this month. You don't have to worry. I stared at the mirror intently. I broke up with Shiya. As soon as the words fell, Bayanyan froze visibly. It seemed like fireworks were exploding in her mind. She swallowed her saliva and her breathing was unstable. Really, I nodded. The woman's voice suddenly became a little small. Carefully. Then what is our relationship now? I hooked my lips at her. Of course we are friends. Like a bucket of cold water poured over my head. Bayanyan's face gradually became ugly. She raised her head and kissed the corner of my lips angrily. Baby, can you stop playing with me? I chuckled and patted his face frivolously. You took the initiative to deliver yourself to me. He stared at me with heavy eyebrows and eyes. Then he gave me a light kiss. It should be my initiative. After a while of being cuddly, Bayanyan went to the kitchen to serve the dishes. He rubbed his hands. Walked in a little awkwardly. Ears were red beyond words. Stumbled and closed. Let's have breakfast together. It's getting cold. I looked at him with some amusement. I don't understand why he is so shy now. We can have breakfast together after going to bed. Will it be a bit ambiguous? Finally, we had a meal together. He held me in his arms before leaving. I'm going back to the institute. Soon, baby. You won't disappear again. I raised my eyebrows and said, I'm not sure. He didn't say anything. He pulled my wrist and took a light bite. It's okay, I'll find you. On the day I left for the airport, I passed by a cherry tree. It was under such a cherry tree that Bayanyan confessed to me. He was right. I am indeed a heartless bad man. I am sarcastic and selfish. I never think about others. So let's stop here. I opened my phone. My cousin sent me another message. Brother, my uncle and aunt took a car to find you. I moved my fingers and transferred 10,000 yuan to him. I opened Bayanyan's message interface and sent him a long essay that I had prepared before. Before entering the airport, I took out my mobile phone card and threw it into the trash can beside me. After doing all this, I took a deep breath. Until the moment when the boarding reminder broadcast sounded, I realized that I seemed to really become a bird and I would be free from now on. Free flying. 12 hours later. I landed in the UK. I rented a house in advance. Living in a small town. The agent took me. I had a smile on my face when I looked at houses. Until the landlord took me to meet my roommate. Bayanyan held a book in her hand. Looking at me innocently. It was a coincidence that the landlord went out. Only Bayanyan and I were left in the room. My forehead was throbbing and my reason was shaky. Why are you here? His tone was sincere. I am also here for further studies. I was confused. He smiled and said, baby. Didn't I say I would find you? You are really capable. Bayanyan smiled. Can I still live here? I opened the door and went out. Whatever you want to do during your study abroad. Every day is novel and fulfilling. Classmates in the class come from all over the world. Everyone is very enthusiastic. It's just that I can feel it occasionally. When I stand in the crowd, there will be a familiar gaze. From time to time it fell on me. I looked up. I couldn't find anyone. I read the financial news 2 days ago. Shiya has officially taken over Shi. A recent photo of Shiya was revealed in the news. The woman in the photo was well dressed. She looked straight at the camera. Her eyes were calm. Another evening. I hummed happily. I walked home in the last daylight. I passed by the landlord's hut. He stuffed me a bottle of strawberry jam. I smiled and thanked him. There is a small patch of roses in the yard where I live. They swayed in the wind. I opened the door and saw a busy figure in the kitchen. Bayanyan heard the sound and brought the apple pie to the table. She didn't even take off her apron. She came over and kissed me. I dodged for a while. Why is she so aggrieved? Can't friends kiss? Okay, I hugged her gently. I felt my eyes were hot for some reason. Bayanyan, I finally felt very happy. She hummed softly. She hugged me back and said thank you. The whole article is over. Thank you for reading.